Hello and welcome. My name is Camille with Liberated Living, and I have practiced as a holistic and naturopathic practitioner for over 25 years. And today I want to use a solution-focused system that I have used in my practice to help reprogram belief patterns and transform your life. This powerful system offers key questions rooted in holistic psychotherapy tailored for those seeking to manifest and align with new outcomes, heal childhood and epigenetic trauma, and overcome fear, doubt, stagnation, or cognitive dissonance. So whether you're facing a current challenge or ready to engage in a deep alignment work, this 7-step model has been successfully applied in healing the recovery centers, empowering countless clients to recode subconscious conditioning and break free from sabotage patterns. So I'm going to cover critical steps to help transform barriers. There's often 1 to 2 of these steps that most miss that are keeping them pinned to their current conditions or an unwanted reality, be it financial, health conditions, professional, relational, educational, and so forth. So just jumping right in, we're going to start with step 1. Decoding the presenting problem. And if you need any help decoding this presenting problem, one way to identify the problem is asking whether it's related to an epigenetic pattern, childhood trauma, or even a parent-child or family pattern, which could also be a birth order with other siblings. That one is very common. Which interaction pattern did we grow up with as maybe an oldest child, perhaps being an overachiever and feeling as if all the responsibility rests on you, or maybe even being a youngest child, perhaps you may feel as if others were doing or enabling you. Perhaps that may be another pattern you're trying to work with. These are just classic examples. It doesn't necessarily mean that that applies. But you may want to ask yourself, what primary role are you playing within the rescue, victim, and persecutor triangle with others? And now it could be transferred to a spouse or another primary relationship. Is there a codependency you've been with someone in your upbringing that now has been transferred, or maybe still currently exists, and yet is continuing to be highlighted in other relationships and generally in these primary relationships? So what emotional trigger was maybe activated by an unhealed belief? And what activated the event and emotional trigger? If you need any help working through those questions, you can refer to cognitive behavioral therapy, the ABC model, the adversity, belief, consequence. So this is one of the most critical steps that I find that is causing clients or individuals to continue to recycle their sabotage patterns and escaping to maybe anesthetize their pain or not knowing how to cope with a particular challenge and staying stuck, therefore not being able to advance with their solutions and gain forward momentum. So this one step here, you can use again this ABC model for adaptive coping responses, and it's learning how to accept instead of resist the problem. So for instance, the adversity, belief, consequence, you can ask the question of what adversity are you experiencing? Again, it could be financial, familial, relational, educational, related to health. It can be a host of issues. Generally, it's common to be experiencing one, if not more, in our present reality. So what is the belief? In other words, what belief has been assigned or attached to this particular obstacle or challenge that you may be facing? So just for a list of examples, it could be maybe feeling that there's some financial lack and maybe some shame related to some financial lack. Often there's some kind of shame related to it. And the way that we could help navigate or even work through that, if we don't feel like we can identify shame, because not everyone really feels or understands how to recognize shame. Do you feel judged by others for your circumstances? Do you feel like you're judging yourself, perhaps, or feel that you're capable of more? Those are often feelings of shame and sometimes just hidden in other layers. So when we look at the belief, we may often find the shame that is working side by side and synonymous with the belief, such as I feel like a failure or I feel like. Those are often ways to identify that. And then what is the consequence of that belief if it is indeed shame or if it is indeed feeling like a failure? So there's generally a behavior that is working hand in hand with the feeling. So what are some of the emotions maybe that you could be experiencing in relation to the presenting problem or chief complaint that you may be experiencing, such as fear, uncertainty? Those are generally very common. And then again, just asking yourself once again, what meaning you've assigned to that presenting problem. Working through that second step, the ABC model, which is really adaptive coping responses, is generally the best way to overcome the residual or recurring pattern. So if we see that there's a pattern that continues to reloop in our life, that one step, mastering that one step, is generally where it starts. And these next few steps are going to help us to work through that particular step. So again, can you identify any judgments that you've perceived from others that maybe you have actually held toward yourself related to the challenge? That's a really important question for us to ask to identify the shame. Or even if there's any resistance that you're giving power to, that's also where we're going to identify or discover some hidden fears. If we're focusing on the problem versus the solution, that's really where we're seeing that we are putting more emphasis on the fear instead of maybe perhaps feeling more excited about solutions, because we've learned this from our childhood. There's some pattern, there was some initial event that formed this particular belief and began to ingrain these particular patterns. And now there's maybe a propensity towards those particular patterns. So this is just working with the programming. We're just unpacking the subconscious here so that we can now recode it. Step 3 is neutralize emotions. So we're going to use different perceptual reframing techniques. And if there's some emotional scars you want to work with, we can ask questions such as, what is this experience or event teaching you? So if, for instance, we're going to use money because it's a more universal issue and a very classic example that most people can at least relate to. If they can't relate right now, they maybe have in times past or certain periods within their life. And with that experience of what is it teaching, it may be teaching us how to save, teaching us how to work less and accomplish more, teaching us not to get involved in the hustle, the grind of life, and maybe that we value money and that we value ourselves more. So therefore, we're going to apply a little bit more of our worth wherever our net worth is. And then we can ask how to create maybe a counter statement for the limiting beliefs. So if you identified some kind of a limiting belief, such as feeling like a failure, maybe you don't feel like you're good with money, relationships, or whatever the case may be, look at maybe where there can be a counter statement, such as, I can be good with money or finances, or I can learn how to save and be financially savvy, for instance. So how is this event teaching you to be better? Again, are you learning to improve yourself or your life in some fashion? The popular reframe is, how did this event happen for you, not to you? So we can use that one as an example just to simplify. So what is the new belief that you can replace with this old limiting belief? And using different counter statements are generally where we're going to find the ideal affirmation to work with that repeated affirmation, because we initially formed a belief from an event, a circumstance, or what was maybe modeled in our youth, something that was demonstrated that we did observe somehow in our subconscious, and most likely in our youth. Prior to the age of 7 is when our subconscious is highly impressionable. So if we have seen it once before, maybe we noticed it begin to be repeated. And so those mantras, that narrative or the belief has now been repeated. And that's actually what forms our beliefs, is generally through repetition. So that's how we're also going to form a new belief, is through the repetition of a new affirmation. Step 4 would be accountability yields empowerment. So how can you now put the power back in your hands and be the change that you wish to see? Famous quote by Gandhi, but seeing it in your own life. So if you were granted a second chance, what would you do differently? If you need to go back to some initial event, be it some trauma-related event, what could you have done differently? And maybe where you felt more empowered in this particular circumstance. It could have been with another individual, a work situation, or even just taking matters into your own hands, whether it's related to health, finances, and so forth. So look at what you could do differently. Is it owning your voice? Is it being able to stand up for yourself, having more of a backbone? There's certainly some areas where we recognize we could we're learning what didn't work, and then now we're trying to course correct so that we're no longer swimming in that pond. And then now we're actually trying to step into new behaviors and embracing a better iteration of ourselves. What is the worst case scenario and a contingency plan? Oftentimes, having a prepared plan is half the battle. So, what can you do if there's another recurring event to prepare for a new outcome? We have to have some kind of a backup plan, often by entertaining new solutions and new strategies. So, for instance, if we feel like we're running out of our cash, right, out of some monetary substance, if we feel as if we are not generating the income that we want, and maybe we want to step into a profession, or we don't want the side hustle anymore, or we want, multiple streams of income, whatever the case may be, what is a backup plan if you do decide to get the gumption to move forward? There's maybe always something you can fall on, or entertaining different strategies and backup scenarios will often help us to feel like we can mitigate the fear. And then step 5 is compassion and understanding heals relationships. And these are often our primary relationships, but they also work in many other facets. So in what way do you want to be acknowledged by others that perhaps you can acknowledge yourself, right? Maybe valuing yourself more, or maybe asking yourself where you feel that you felt devoid of being acknowledged by others, that you can now begin to acknowledge yourself. And this is often where we're going to find the correlation to the challenge that we're having, is where we're not feeling valued, or we may not be acknowledging ourselves or feeling acknowledged by others, or seeing that perceived. And sometimes others may be acknowledging us, but because it's a void in our own mind, we're going to see absence in our physical reality as well. So once we can begin to acknowledge ourselves and we feel like we can embody that acknowledgement, then we will also start to see that transformed in our physical reality, or maybe with others. And I've seen this happen in multiple instances where it's even been word for word, more or less looking at, rather than, knowing everything is an inside job. And, indeed, we cannot refer to others to fill our cup, right? How can we first acknowledge ourselves? And the more we acknowledge ourselves, the easier it is to acknowledge others as well. Because once again, if it's a void within our own internal reality, then we're also going to see that reflected externally. So in what way can you begin to love yourself the way you desired it from maybe a parent or partner, significant other, whatever the case may be, or where maybe you don't feel like you've been loved? And that's kind of synonymous to the first question of acknowledging ourselves, but this is taking it to a little bit farther. So we're moving this step more into feeling loved and recognizing that love really is the answer, is the panacea. If we can love ourselves by acknowledging ourselves, that's one that I see very often, and we know this is really common in society, is when we feel as if we are sacrificing our own needs for another. And instead, we recognize that win-wins are when we are not sacrificing our needs, but we're happy to do it. And it feels like it really is a twofold process and mutually beneficial. That's when I've learned in life that if I have to put too much effort forward, then it's not going to be a win-win, because I am burdening myself for the sake of something else. Now, granted, we have parenting and children and circumstances where we are sacrificing, but we might want to ask ourselves, where can we perhaps dial back, or even if we need to remove ourselves from circumstances that are perhaps requiring too much of us, and is a big ask, instead of finding where that compromise is. Those are very important when we're trying to establish firm boundaries in relationships, and not knowing necessarily what really feels right, instead of feeling like maybe perhaps an obligation. So what is a generational pattern in your family that has not been fully healed or addressed? And this is related to epigenetics, or transgenerational epigenetics, or epigenetic inheritance, TEI, as often in some kind of terms of codependency or addiction. Now, addiction, remember, is not always just to substances. Addiction can be to gaming, it can be to work, relationships, which we often use the term in the context of relationships with codependency, but codependency on any of these external stimuli is a way of trying to cope instead of working with that second step of adaptive coping responses. We often want to change a generational pattern versus continuing to pass on those patterns. Let's move to the next step. Step 6 is evaluate growth and gain gratitude. Look at what you've gained from this challenge and ask, how has it been a catalyst for your growth and potential? If you've been experiencing a lot of lack or financial burden in some way, has that been a catalyst for your growth? Is it showing you what no longer works? And so therefore it's perhaps guiding you to move forward in a new trajectory of what will work. What limitations have you perhaps held about reaching a goal? And, a goal could be specific resources that might be available for you, because we don't recognize sometimes we're putting specific terms and conditions on what outcome that we want. We can't have this because. And so we have to look at where we've limited ourselves, because that's often where the resistance is. And the resistance is where maybe there's a limiting belief, some lack of, or some kind of dissonance, some conflicting belief is often where we want something, but there's the but or the however. So that contrary belief is really what's preventing it. So what do you feel that you have to give up to make room for something that you do desire? And with this step, I think the most important thing we can do is just list new solutions that can help overcome this particular challenge, or maybe see where others have achieved it that maybe make it possible. Because as soon as we lift ourselves from feeling limited or restricted in some way, and can be open-minded to new solutions, and then just stay in that open-minded space, in that state of mind, that is often where the magic elixir is. Knowing that we can remove ourselves from thinking that we have to experience this challenge or we have to spend money to make money. And these are always really common underpinning beliefs, and we don't recognize how much they are generational. I still continue to hear this very often as I've worked with clients, and as I've carried them myself throughout the years and recognize that this is something that has been indeed a learned pattern. Okay, so step 7, alchemical transformation. So this is where we align to our authentic purpose and potential, where we can finally feel that we are acknowledging ourselves for the tools and the skills and strengths that we do possess. So therefore, we are making a larger impact to society. So where have you learned that you can benefit others, for instance? You can list 1 to 3 areas of your life that you would like to experience success. Now we're going to go through a 4-point test within the areas you'd like to experience success, and maybe something you do envision for yourself, and see if it passes this 4-point test. If you do not have yeses on all 4 of these questions, then you need to go back and revise your vision or goal. So 1, does your vision excite you? Yes or no? Does your vision align with your core values? Yes or no? Does your vision require you to grow? Yes or no? And does your vision serve everyone for the better? Yes or no? If you did answer yes, then obviously you're on the right track. If not, then you may need to go back and take a look at what you need to do to get yeses on all 4 of those questions. And how can overcoming this challenge help advance your career or purpose in fulfilling what you feel is maybe more of a meaningful life, or achieving the goal that you want, that again is beneficial on a higher scale? And how can you turn this into a win in your life to contribute more value to others? If you find that your goal is helping on a larger scale, helping others, it will manifest a lot easier if it is indeed a win-win. So if you want more questions like this for your own practice, be sure to check out our Done For You Therapeutic Workbook and Business in a Box for coaches, therapists, and other healing professionals, which includes an accredited diploma and all of the tools that you do need to advance an exciting turnkey business right away. Check out the link below and subscribe to receive more free video content like this and help our channel grow. Thank you.